In March 2014, two young Dutch women, 21-year-old Lisanne Froon and 22-year-old Kremers, boarded a plane bound for Panama. For them, it was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime. 2 months exploring a new country, improving their Spanish, volunteering with children, and experiencing the vibrant culture of Central America. Lisanne, with her long, light brown hair and a bright, athletic build, was known for her love of photography and her calm, friendly nature. Kris, tall with striking red hair and a confident smile, was the more outgoing of the two. A natural leader with a sharp sense of humor. They were inseparable friends, both from the small town of Amersfoort in the Netherlands. After months of careful planning, they landed in Panama City on March 15th. For the first 2 weeks, their trip went exactly as planned. They visited tropical beaches, bustling markets, and historic colonial streets. They stayed in hostels, met other travelers, and updated family and friends regularly via Facebook. On March 29th, they arrived in Boquete, a small, picturesque town in the highlands of western Panama. Boquete was a paradise for hikers and nature lovers. Surrounded by lush cloud forests, coffee plantations, and the towering Baru volcano. It was here that the two women planned to start their volunteer work at a local school. But when they arrived, there was a surprise. The school wasn't ready for them yet. Their volunteer work would not begin for another week. Suddenly, the girls found themselves with unexpected free time, and they decided to make the most of it. On the morning of April 1st, Kris and Lisanne left the home where they were staying, accompanied by a local dog named Blue. They were headed for the scenic Pianista Trail, a popular hiking route known for its breathtaking views of the mountains and jungle. It was a sunny day, and the two set off in light clothing, carrying only small backpacks. They waved goodbye, smiling. It was the last confirmed sighting of Kremers and Lisanne Froon alive. The Pianista Trail was famous for its natural beauty, but also for its unpredictability. It started as a wide, well-marked path, passing through farmland and coffee plantations. But the further you climbed, the narrower it became, winding into dense cloud forest, where the air grew cooler and the sunlight dimmed. At first, Kris and Lisanne's hike seemed normal. Several tourists reported seeing two young women matching their description along the lower part of the trail that day. They were smiling, taking photos, and appeared in no hurry. The Pianista Trail ended at a scenic overlook, the Mirador, offering a panoramic view of the Boquete Valley below. For most hikers, that was the turnaround point. From there, the path became much more challenging, descending steeply into the jungle on the far side of the Continental Divide. Few tourists ventured further without a guide. But something happened that day. Evidence from later recovered photos suggests Kris and Lisanne may have decided to continue beyond the Mirador. Why they made that decision remains one of the central mysteries of the case. Sometime in the early afternoon, the girls' phones began making calls. First to Dutch numbers, then to Panama's emergency services. The first call to 112 in the Netherlands was placed at 4:39 p.m. from Kris's phone. It didn't go through. There was no signal deep in the forest. By evening, their families in the Netherlands had no idea that the two women were in trouble. Back in Boquete, their host noticed they hadn't returned, but it wasn't unusual for hikers to be out late. After all, it was still daylight when they were last seen. The next morning, Kris and Lisanne's absence could no longer be ignored. Their belongings, clothes, laptops, and passports were still in their room. Blue, the dog who had accompanied them, had returned alone. It was the first real sign that something was terribly wrong. On April 2nd, 2014, the alarm was raised. Local authorities, volunteer guides, and residents of Boquete organized a search along the Pianista Trail. They followed the path up to the Mirador and beyond, combing the dense vegetation for any trace of the two young women. But the cloud forest was unforgiving. Thick foliage blocked sunlight, making it dim even during the day. The ground was muddy and slippery from recent rain, and the sound of rushing water echoed from hidden ravines below. Visibility was limited to just a few meters in some places. Search teams shouted their names. Kris Lisanne! But there was no response. Even Blue, the dog who had walked part of the trail with them, couldn't pick up a fresh scent. Over the following days, the search expanded. Helicopters scanned the area from above, while indigenous Ngaba Bugle guides searched the jungle floor. They checked local hostels, bus stations, and villages in case the women had tried to find their way out on foot. Days passed with no leads. Then, something unusual happened. The families of Kris and Lisanne arrived from the Netherlands, accompanied by Dutch police officers and sniffer dogs. They brought specialized search equipment and began coordinating with Panamanian authorities. Still, the trail was cold. The jungle seemed to have swallowed the two young women without a trace. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, news of their disappearance began making headlines. Friends described them as responsible and safety-conscious. The idea that they had simply wandered off didn't make sense to anyone who knew them. The search would continue for weeks, but it would take over 2 months before a breakthrough came. And when it did, it only deepened the mystery. It was June 14th, more than 2 months since Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon had vanished. By then, the official search had long been scaled back. But for the indigenous Ngaba Bugle people who lived deep in the jungle, the mystery had not been forgotten. That morning, a local woman was walking along the bank of the Culebra River, several miles from the end of the Pianista Trail. The river was swollen from recent rains, its muddy water rushing between large boulders. It was here, on a patch of sand, that she noticed something strange: a blue backpack sitting just above the waterline. The bag was in surprisingly good condition, showing no signs of having been in the river for long. Inside were 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 in cash, Lisanne's passport, a water bottle, and 2 bras. There was also a camera and 2 cell phones, one belonging to Kris and one to Lisanne. When investigators examined the phones, they discovered something chilling. Over the course of 10 days after April 1st, there had been multiple attempts to call emergency services, all unsuccessful due to lack of signal. On April 6th, Lisanne's phone battery died and was never used again. Kris's iPhone continued to be turned on periodically until April 11th, when someone attempted to unlock it with the wrong PIN. From that point on, the phone was never used again. But it was the camera that provided the most haunting clues. The memory card contained over 100 photos taken during their hike. The first images were cheerful: the girls smiling on the trail, posing at the Mirador, and capturing the beauty of the surrounding jungle. But then came the night shots, dozens of photos taken in complete darkness using the camera's flash. Showed little more than dense vegetation, a few close-ups of rocks, and one particularly disturbing image: the back of Kris's head, with what appeared to be blood near her temple. No one could explain why these pictures were taken, or what had happened between the cheerful morning shots and the desperate nighttime images. Just days after the discovery of the backpack, search teams, now guided by the Ngaba Bugle locals, began combing the riverbanks near where it had been found. It didn't take long before another disturbing clue surfaced. A few kilometers upstream, they found a single hiking boot. Inside the boot was a human foot, still wearing a sock. Forensic tests later confirmed it belonged to Lisanne Froon. Nearby in the same area, searchers found several small fragments of bone. Some were later identified as belonging to Kris Kremers, but the condition of the remains only raised more questions. Lisanne's foot appeared relatively well preserved, suggesting it had been protected from the elements for some time. Kris's bone fragments, however, were unusually bleached, as if they had been exposed to the sun or treated with chemicals. There was no way to determine a cause of death from what little remained. Even more unsettling was the location. The river was many kilometers from where the women were last seen, and the terrain between was rugged and dangerous. How had they ended up so far away? And why was there no trace of a struggle, camp, or shelter? Theories began to swirl. From a tragic hiking accident to foul play involving locals, to even stranger, more sinister explanations. But without more evidence, the truth remained frustratingly out of reach. One thing was clear: the final days of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon had been spent in fear, isolation, and growing desperation deep within the Panamanian jungle. In the years since the disappearance of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, the case has become one of the most debated mysteries in modern true crime. With limited evidence and conflicting clues, countless theories have emerged. The official explanation from Panamanian authorities points to a tragic accident. According to this theory, the two young women became disoriented after crossing beyond the Mirador, wandered into more dangerous terrain, and suffered fatal injuries while trying to find their way back. The desperate nighttime photos, they suggest, were attempts to use the camera's flash as a makeshift flashlight. But many believe this explanation leaves too many questions unanswered. Why did they venture so far beyond the trail without a guide? Why were their remains found in such drastically different conditions? And who was trying, unsuccessfully, to unlock Kris's phone after Lisanne's had already died? Some theories suggest foul play, that the women encountered someone in the jungle who harmed them, and that parts of their belongings were staged or moved to mislead investigators. The indigenous communities near the search area deny any involvement, and no suspects were ever identified. Others point to the strangeness of the photos. The sheer number of nighttime shots, over 90, has led to speculation that they were signaling for help, trying to scare away an animal, or documenting something they feared. Beyond the facts and theories, the story has taken on a life of its own. True crime forums, YouTube channels, and podcasts continue to revisit the case, analyzing every photograph, phone log, and official report. For many, the mystery of Kris and Lisanne is a haunting reminder of how quickly an adventure can turn into a nightmare, and how nature, isolation, and the unknown can conspire to erase almost every trace of what truly happened. Today, their families in the Netherlands still seek answers, holding on to the hope that one day the truth will emerge from the silence of the Panamanian jungle.